All right, we are at the final stages of this build. Let's talk about the last things we look for before we call for final inspection. So starting with all the exterior doors of a house, you always want to make sure for every hinge that's installed that you have two 3-inch number 10 screws on each of the hinges. And this is for security reasons, to keep the door intact so it doesn't get kicked open as easily as if it was just a regular 1.25-inch screws that come with the doors from the manufacturer. This is a weird one, but required. Anytime you have glass partitions, they want to have some kind of an indicator, at least during inspection, that you have something here to indicate that there's a piece of glass there, so you don't just walk and bam and walk into it. And it does happen, but stickers are usually a good thing to have. So any kind of a label on the glass would be good, at least for during inspection. Interior guardrails, make sure they're 36 inches. Exterior guardrails are going to be 42, but interiors are a bit more forgiving, 36 at the waist. So for handrails, interior handrails, you want to make sure when you do a measurement that you have 36 inches from the tip of the nosing measuring straight up, that this is 36. Next thing, a very important thing, is stair riser heights. You always want to make sure that when you have your stair measurements that you're no more than a 1/4 inch off. Okay, so inspectors will pick on this, and if you're more than a 1/4 inch off for all the steps, you may have to shim them up or actually redo the set of stairs to make them all equivalent. This is kind of a safety thing, so prevent you from tripping as a result of uneven stair heights. One thing you may want to consider during your final inspections and during the finishing stage of the houses is to protect your stairs. So in this case, instead of using cardboard and tape, I see a lot of that happening, but we got something like this made. It's just a piece of plywood, 3-sided, with a little bit of a catch on the end so it doesn't slip off. What it does is it protects the nosing part, which is really, really easy to damage. Like this part, I mean, before you leave the job site, you want to make sure that you're protecting this, because to repair these areas, it's a pain in the butt. And you want to preserve this integrity for the homeowner. Now moving forward toward a more life and safety item, these are called window restrictors. So for all windows above the first floor, you want to make sure that there's no way the window can open beyond, say, a 5 or 6 inches, because they have a tendency of allowing somebody to open it all the way and fall out of the house. So this is something that inspectors look for. The restrictor is installed right at the base of this hinge right here, and it prevents the window from cranking any more wide than this. You can see it's not allowing it to. Okay, so that's called window restrictors. Gushing inside here and making its way to all the internals of the walls. Okay, now check this out. You see this up here, the door and the piece of glass? Well, this piece of glass actually folds open. Now, why do we have that? Well, this happens to be a steam shower. And check out this linear steam head. I love this piece. Typically, they'll come with like a big round or big square. I like using this Mr. Steam linear steam head. It's actually really, really nice when it comes to mixing in with a modern look, more sleek look. But what you want to ensure is you have this piece of foldable glass here to allow the steam to come out after you're using it. Because the last thing you want is to have all the steam trapped inside here with nowhere to go, and that creates a lot of potential mold. So you want to make sure that all the steam can escape after use and doesn't get stuck inside. Now, same with the interior stairs. The exterior stair risers also have their own tolerances. So make sure they're as close as possible to each height. I've been waiting for a year to show you this, but check out the view from this rooftop deck. Amazing. While we're up here, the heights for your guardrails, well, this is a parapet wall, but it acts as a guardrail as well. You want to make sure this is minimum 42 inches, measured from the ground to the top. And you see this is sloped. The last thing you want is a flat parapet wall. You want water that accumulates here to be able to drain off on the inside or the outside. And of course, the drains on the inside will be able to drain to the outside through your scuppers or your gutters. Check out this beautiful kitchen. So you might notice I got these cameras here, these IP cameras, just something you buy on Amazon. We've had these on the job site for the last, I'd say, half a year. And what this does is gives us the opportunity to have a remote view of the activities that take place on the job site. And so that gives the contractor a good sense of who's on site. It also gives a homeowner a sense of who's on site. You'll notice on these glass panels, there's a piece of metal capping that's put in place. Now this is to prevent the tops of the glass being exposed to any kind of damage, because once the tops of these tempered glass panels get hit hard enough, they will shatter. And now that we've come to this topic, let's talk about handrails for a second. Handrails in this house have to be engineered. So the principle of design behind this railing is that it remains in place regardless of whether this glass is intact or not. Even though this is fastened to the glass, you see in 3 points here, it's also fastened to the structure of the house. So in the event that this glass does break, this handrail stays in place and poses no safety issues to the person who needs to use it. If it was relying on the glass and the glass broke as well, and this handrail was attached only to the glass, this handrail would just fall to the ground and the occupants would have nowhere to grab in the event of an emergency or when they need to access the stairs when the glass does break. So to recapture the stair railings, glass have to be protected in the tops if they're tempered to prevent shattering, and handrails have to be independently fastened from the glass. And they have to be continuous from the tops all the way to the bottom. You cannot have a break anywhere in between. And lastly, because they're engineered, you need a Schedule B and a Schedule CB upon completion. Okay, so we're in the mechanical room right now, and I want to explain to you the life and safety feature of the sprinkler system. Okay, now note that the sprinkler system is in line with the main water line coming into the house, so it remains uninterrupted, except for the main valve. You also note that there's a gauge attached here that shows you the pressure that's currently in the sprinkler system, and this interlock device that connects the sprinkler system to the fire alarm system. So what this system does is, when this sprinkler system sees a drop in pressure as a result of the sprinklers going off, over the course of X amount of seconds, it will activate this interlock. And what this does is it activates all the fire smoke alarms inside the house. Let's do a demo. So let's mimic a fire sprinkler system going off. So right now we're releasing the pressure. As you can see, the gauge here is dropping in pressure. What's going to happen is the fire alarms are going to start setting off within the house, and because they're all connected, all the fire alarms within the house will go off at the same time. Hear that? So the entire house now is set off. Once the pressure builds back up again, it'll be back to normal state. Let's touch on some electrical for a second. You'll notice that these are normal breakers, and these set of breakers here are AFCIs. AFCIs will be located in almost every single plug inside the house. These have an extra level of protection where they trip a little bit more sensitive than regular breakers. So oftentimes you move into a brand new house, you'll notice that they may use a curling iron or some hair dryer at the same time, and these will have a tendency to trip because they're very sensitive to that kind of a surge in electrical. So one other thing you want to look for is when you have a house that's built with spray foam involved, especially when you have a Part 5 house and an envelope engineer, you want to make sure that a spray foam company's information is attached to the backside of the electrical panel with all the details of when it was installed, what was installed, and by who was installed. Why do they want this inside the electrical panel? It's because if this house were ever to get renovated, the records may not be made available. However, anytime you renovate a house, this part is unlikely to be touched, therefore preserving the records for as long as possible. Anytime you build a house with a secondary suite, you have to make sure that you build it with this side of the suite to be fire rated and compartmentalized properly. One of the requirements is self-closing doors on a fire-rated frame, meaning there's gaskets and the self-closer built into the door. And the self-closer, as its name intends, is supposed to close the door when released, like so. And inspectors will check that the door latches in place every time. If it just closes like this, unlatched, it will fail. Okay, we're entering the renter suite here. And one of the things you have to keep in mind when you have a secondary suite is the electrical panel and the water shutoff have to be independent. So in the event that they need to access their own electrical shutoffs or breakers, or the main water shutoff, that they're accessible without needing to enter the primary user's area. So for example, here we have the shutoff located where they can access it. So in the event of emergency, they can shut off all the water from their side without having to access the homeowner side. Same as the electrical panel, it must be made available for the secondary suite user. So there's a second panel here. It's attached to its own meter, so they have also their own ability to pay for their own usage. So because we built the secondary suite independent from the main unit of the house, the heating and cooling loads are going to also be separate because you don't want the upstairs controlling the temperatures and the settings for the downstairs area. So this unit has its own heat pump. It's a wall-mounted version, a Mitsubishi, and it's controllable by the tenant, so that's completely independent from upstairs. On the topic of life and safety and secondary suites, because this area is separate from the upstairs, you want to make sure any kind of penetrations coming through the fire-rated walls and assemblies are also fire-rated. So in this case, we have yet to put the fire caulking around this penetration because this assembly here is what separates the upstairs and the downstairs. And because this dry vent is penetrating through the drywall, we have to add fire caulking around here to complete that fire assembly. And that also goes for these penetrations here, even though they're water lines, we will have to add the fire caulking around these areas to complete that fire rating. And one of the last things we look for in the kitchen area for inspections is you want to make sure there's always an electrical outlet at the end of the island so that it's accessible for any user. That's one of the code requirements for electrical code. So let's make our way back to the outside and see what kind of items that the inspectors will look for their final inspections. Let's start with addresses. So the house number should always be located on somewhere visible on the face of the house. If there's a secondary suite involved, you want to separate the two entrances. One represents the primary suite. Two represents the secondary suite. And if you're building a laneway house in Vancouver, the laneway house address will be number 3. Similar to the inside of the house, you want to make sure your handrails, okay, are 36 inches from the nosing measure straight up. You want to make sure your glass panels also have the protective caps on top of it. And you want to make sure that these are also engineered and the engineer has signed off on all the work. Okay, now when it comes to landscaping, you want to make sure everything is installed as per the plans. For example, in the backyard, we're specified for grass. That's coming in today. You want to make sure all your pathways are exactly as per plan because there's a calculation involved for permeability, and that has to be maintained when it comes to the as-built inspection. So anytime you build a house, you're typically on a site for about a year's time, and you're also going to be neighbors to neighbors which you've never been neighbors with. So you always want to keep that relationship as well. Before you leave the job site, always make sure the fences on both sides of the properties are maintained just the way they were or better than when you first started with. Fix all the areas, repair the sidewalks, clean up your neighbors' yards, make sure you leave it in good shape so when the new occupants of this house come in, everybody's all friends. So let's call that final inspection. Let's wrap this job up. Let's move on to the next one.